Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast from Law Insider. We're doing a special conversation today because we are doing something special with our friend Marcia Narine Weldon. Marcia is joining us from sunny South Florida, I assume. How are you today, Marcia?
I'm awesome because it's sunny.
It is, it is. I'm going to rant about how hot it is here, unseasonably hot as it is in Kansas City, but I'm not going to do that because we have a big thing going on that involves you, and I wanted to just give people context about it. We've sent a couple of emails. People have been visiting and paying attention to this page where we're talking about something exciting we're doing. It is a workshop on severance. It is the Severance Playbook Workshop. And the reason I wanted to have a longer conversation with you was to give context on a bit what we're thinking in terms of the actual format of this thing. We're going to continue to do conversations like workshops like this. So I want to orient people to the format a little bit and why we're structuring it this way, but also just the subject. So let's start there. I pay attention to the news occasionally. I try not to because it makes me very depressed. But Twitter makes me pay attention to sad things, including layoffs. There are a lot of companies who are restructuring. The new way to make money, especially in tech world, is to be
Right.
efficient, to cut, which is very different than 10
hmm
years ago. So there's a lot of severance happening, not the TV show, which was very good, but actual sad laying people off. What is going on? What's the reality of this trend and how people are experiencing this? Are you seeing it in the news and in the work that you do? Are you seeing this severance trend, and are you seeing people get appropriately nervous about the difficulty of severance?
Well, there's a few perspectives in there. First of all, we've talked about severance and layoffs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in more detail in a second. But the other time that you're going to see severance is when you're terminating somebody and you're worried about potential lawsuits, right? The only reason to have severance, well, there's a magnanimous, I want to make sure you can feed your children for the next few weeks until you find another job. But from a company perspective, the only reason to give severance is because you want to get that release. You want to get that release from claims, from potential lawsuits, known or unknown, depending on the jurisdiction you're in. Right. So you would also have those same considerations if you're firing somebody. So Mike Whalen is a slacker. He's been here for 10 years. We've never bothered to ever tell him he's a slacker. And he falls into several protected categories. Maybe that's race, gender, national origin, disability, age, whatever it is, and we're afraid that he's going to sue us. So we'll give him a package, which is typically here called, but that's so that he won't sue us. He has the money, but the most important thing for us is the release. On the layoff side, obviously, we're seeing lots and lots of layoffs. We're facing economic headwinds. It's not new to me. I've been an employment lawyer for over 25 years. So I've seen this going on for a long time. But we go in cycles, and now we're in a big cycle of the layoffs. That's another reason you're going to see mass amounts of severance.
Yeah, and I saw. Well, first of all, I don't like that you always use me as the example of the person who was a slacker. It has to be like this is always true. But I saw recently in the news the National Labor Relations Board in the United States issued some commentary about basically saying, "Hey, you remember all those times that you said, 'Let me give you a way to go get a job,' and now you can't ever talk about this company in the future. That's actually not going to work." And there are a lot of these tricks of the trade that employment lawyers especially have been using. And if you're in an in-house scenario, especially if you're on a small team, you might not really consider yourself an employment lawyer, but you're dealing with these issues. My sense of the commentary from the National Labor Relations Board is that if you get this wrong, you could be in real trouble. What's the downside risk if you do this wrong? What are the outcomes that in-house attorneys should be aware of if they're working on this problem?
Well, there's a few things that it's really important for small in-house lawyers to know, small company in-house lawyers, right? The National Labor Relations Act will apply to you whether or not you have a unionized workforce. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that lawyers from large and small companies make, right? Because like, oh, we don't have any unions, this doesn't apply to us. So what the National Labor Relations Act generally does for non-unionized workforces is make sure that people can talk badly about the employer, can determine whether or not there needs to be a union, and can basically protect various rights whether or not they're in a union. So when it comes to severance, the things that the decision is looking at is what do your non-disparagement clauses say? What do your non-compete say? What do your non-disclosures say? How transparent are you? when you have that release, which is again the only reason to give the severance, are you preventing them from bringing certain kinds of claims? Now, this is what's going to be confusing to lawyers, and this is what we'll be talking about at the workshop, right? The whole point is getting the release. What do you mean there might be some carve out saying, but not a release for this? So if you get it wrong, hopefully your agreement also has a severability clause, right? So you can strike out what's actually wrong. So the worst thing that can happen to you is you may have the NRB coming down on you, right? But practically speaking, the worst thing that can happen is that the release is not going to be valid, which means the person's going to come and sue you.
So we've established that severance is a big deal. It's relevant right now. If you get it wrong, you can get into some serious trouble. And I want to talk about the format that we're doing. We keep using this word workshop because it means something to us, and we'll talk about that. But before we do, you mentioned your career. For people who are thinking about coming to this workshop and learning from you specifically, we chose you on purpose. We're partnering with you on these projects on purpose because of your background. So just give people a sense of that background. You mentioned that you were in-house for quite a while. You're a professor at Miami now. Tell us about your background that you bring to these workshops.
Yeah. So big picture, been a lawyer for 31 years, an employment lawyer, now I think about it, for 27 years. And I've done that in big law firms. I've done that in boutique law firms. And I also did that in-house. And as an in-house lawyer, I probably dealt with thousands of severances. And after I left the in-house life, I went to academia, but I always continued to practice law with boutique firms and others. So I'm knee deep in this on a regular basis. And now when I represent people, sometimes I'll represent executives who have lost their jobs, and I'll tell them how to negotiate because I know the whole inside track. Right. And so I've been outside counsel, I've been in-house counsel, I've done the plaintiff side, I've done the defense side, and I obviously keep up with these issues. And by the way, I've also been the head of HR for a division of a Fortune 500 company. So there's lots of little benefits and things. So when we do this workshop, I want to give you all an idea of here's some things that you should always say no to if they ask for it. Here are some things that you might say, you might pretend that you really care about, but you're not really going to care about it. Right. And here are some things that you would just always say yes to, but you've got to pick your battles. But the goal is for you to figure out with your company, what's your risk tolerance? What are you willing to give? What are some of your throwaway benefits that you say, sure, we'll go ahead and continue that, or we'll give you this. Even things like like cash in lieu of outplacement. You might not even offer outplacement, but those are the kinds of things that can really prevent people from dealing with expensive litigations. And more importantly, if you understand how to treat people with dignity, because you're not often going to be negotiating with somebody else's lawyer. You're sometimes just talking to them. And it's really going to be important to think of just how that human touch, because having dealt with all those, we never had a situation where severance negotiation failed. But 12 years I was in-house, actually twice. But that was because they were asking for the moon and the stars, and sometimes you have to take those risks. But the other thing we'll talk about in the workshop is how do you know when to say, something, go ahead and sue. And,
Yeah.
you might say, we would never say that. There's some times when you would, and we can talk about how you'll make that risk calculus as well.
Yeah, I want to address this issue, this question of the workshop. You and I have talked about this quite a bit. Continuing education in legal is pretty broken. I think we all know that. The ability to go to a conference hotel, and sit up in your room, and while you're knitting, you've got some video playing in the background. You're not paying attention. It's fine. You collect the CLE credit. You move on. I think particularly if you're in-house, particularly if you're in a small team in in-house, the opportunities for education, it's hard to get high quality, you actually learn something education, but it's also super important because you might have an entire department. Side note, the size of companies that have one lawyer on their team has just shocked me as I've seen, $250 million companies
Right.
with one person on the team. So you're shouldering quite a burden. And so it's important that you actually learn with the ability to then replicate that learning. For that reason, we're trying to change this concept of how we learn. You've been in education. You have been educating adults for a while about how to do these things. What is your feeling on how we make this not just sitting in a chair for a couple of hours, but actually creating engaged learning?
Right. So my vision, and I think our vision, is that you're going to learn by doing, right? So you don't really remember much of what you hear. and what you see. But if you're having to do something, if you say, okay, my company has this number of people, these are the kinds of risks we deal with. When you're listening to me talk, you're going to actually be able to implement because you're going to have a playbook. I think people learn through hypotheticals and simulations. So this doesn't mean we're going to throw you into breakout rooms and make you do those kinds of things necessarily. We may not. But when you're able to say, this is my actual tangible issue I'm dealing with now, how will I address it? That makes it something that's useful. So it's a workshop because you're working and you're able to take that back with some tangible deliverables that you can put in place in your job, in your company, as soon as you're finished with the workshop. And that's the goal. So it's not going to be, all right, how much longer is this going to be? It's going to be, oh, I never thought about that. And as a matter of fact, I need to go back. I want you to be thinking, I need to go back and talk to my HR person right now. And if you, by the way, are the HR person, because there is nothing, then you're saying, oh, wow, I've got to change this right away. Oh, I didn't realize that practice we've had might actually be a de facto ERISA severance plan, right? And if you don't know what any of those words mean, then you definitely need to be in the workshop because that's the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about. What are the mistakes that you're already making? And because a lot of times it's really, you're not, incompetent, you just don't have the knowledge. And the goal is to use my 27 years of experience doing this, having seen almost everything, so that you can do something that is tailored to your specific situation, not a generic, this is what you should think about with severance.
Right. I would point out with that there will be opportunities for questions both in the workshop and we had a conversation about doing office hours afterwards. If we have enough demand from people who are attending to say, all right, I want to dig in deeper, I want to apply this more to my situation, we can have that conversation. We could certainly set up a time. I remember office hours. No one would go during law school until like right at the end of the semester, and now everybody wants to talk to the professor. But we will have that opportunity as well. You mentioned something, I need to go change my policies. I need to go revisit the process that we do things. And this gets to this conversation of the playbook. My sense is in-house that we use the word playbook to apply to basically anything that has words in a file. And as somebody who tries to create and teach, it's interesting because we use the same word for a document that I would consider a knowledge management tool for the lawyers who are inside making decisions. We use the same term for if we hand off a document to procurement that says, call us if X, but don't call us if Y, which is a totally different audience.
Right.
I want to explain for people who are considering this our concept of a playbook because I think it aligns with what you were just talking about in terms of policies. We are thinking of it as a knowledge management tool, very similar to a standard operating procedure. We're going to make some decisions out of context so that once we're in context, we know the principles upon which we're making some decisions. So I know you have been working with me and Adam on this concept of a playbook, of a workbook. Talk to me about your feelings on that, and especially aligned with what you were talking about, you learning, you going home, you doing this.
Right.
How are we going to orient people to this playbook product?
Right. I think, when I, decided to come on with you, I'm thinking, what would I have wanted to have if I knew nothing about this area, or I knew just enough to be dangerous, right? Or if I had to do more with less. And it's really a list of the things I should be thinking about, a list of the things that could go wrong, some sample clauses, things that I could be able to say, all right, we don't have anything, so now I know what to add. Or I didn't realize that now that the law has changed, I need to change things. Because again, if you are the one or two or three people in a legal department for a company of 250 million people, you're dealing with lots of different things. This is the last thing you're thinking about, but you're the go-to person to say, hey, I need you to do this, or we've got a plan for a layoff, or we've got to terminate that employee who complained about sexual harassment. Go ahead and do some kind of severance or settlement agreement. And you might not know where to start. So you might just go on the internet, or you might call up one of your friends and say, hey, send me something. But it's not going to be from your playbook. It may not be right. So if you'll see, these are the kind of key clauses. These are the biggest pitfalls. Here are some examples. You can basically, build it in a modular format, something that is tailor-made for your situation.
Yeah, you outlined pretty perfectly what our concept of a playbook is going to be. It's this combination of substantive instructions, all of this, here's what to look out for, here's the red flags, that kind of thing, and also some worksheets for people to be able to go through and make their own decisions. I made the joke that if the playbook is the Bible product, that you are the preacher in this situation, because I think that analogy works because we're trying to help the attendees become their own decision makers, to really own that process of making the choices, and to be able to do your job well, of not just being handed a bunch of decisions, because frankly your bosses could go to a worksheet for that, but for you to be able to make choices. It's a little bit Socratic method-y. Don't be afraid of it. We're nice, I promise. But really for you to be able to go make the decision. So in closing, I want to ask you to sort of give us the 2-minute pitch. I am thinking about this issue of severance. I'm looking at this page and thinking, should I go commit to this? Should I commit the money to this? Should I commit the 2 hours of sitting to this? Should I commit the time of reading the playbook and going through and understanding this? If you were to make a couple-minute pitch to somebody thinking about this, why would they do this? What would you ask them? What would you tell them?
It'll be a lot shorter than 2 minutes. You could have a lawsuit for race, gender, national origin, ADA, all those kinds of claims, and you could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees just to win, right? Or you could spend, a nominal amount and 2 hours and come out with something that is going to significantly mitigate the risks of you doing something wrong. So if you're like me, where legal fees hit your P&L, right, or and settlements may either hit your P&L, the operations P&L, it is a no-brainer to me. So we could go through the big, this is what you learn. But right now, I think of the lawyers, sometimes we're cost centers. I like to think of us as revenue protectors. So let's protect the revenue, protect what the salespeople have brought in, and save the company and save yourself a lot of time. This doesn't mean, by the way, that you can put all this together and you'll never need to go to outside counsel, right? You may still need to go to outside counsel, but the amount of fees you're going to have will be significantly lowered because you will have put something together and then you can bounce ideas off of them. And again, so if it's either legal fees to outside counsel or legal fees to your outside counsel to deal with the lawsuit or the settlements, that's why you do this, because this is going to be how you protect the revenue at a time when people are getting laid off or fired and their initial instinct is going to be to say, I'm going to sue because this was wrong.
Yeah. And that ability to be the competent decision and the confident decision maker, I think for particularly the very small in-house teams that I've talked to, that confidence is just so valuable. So we want to give you that. All right. Well, in terms of details, we're coming up on this. It is June 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. It is set up as a 2-hour workshop, including Q&A. So you'll be there for that 2-hour block. You'll also have access to the recording of this for a month, I think is how Zoom sets it up. But we would obviously prefer that you are there live. This is a workshop. It is meant to be interactive. So it is June 7th at 1 p.m. if you can get there. We'll also have, like I said, we can set up office hours. You will have that deliverable of the playbook as we described it. So go sign up. If you go over to lawinsider.com/resources, we have it featured there. And if you're listening to this in the future, we'll, assuming that we get positive feedback from this, we'll continue to do these workshops into the future. So make sure you email us at community@lawinsider.com if you have ideas for workshops that you think would work for this kind of playbook concept, or if you want to revisit this severance issue. Marcia, I'm excited. This is coming up. We've got a lot of work to do. So we will see you there in a week. Thank you for joining us.
Hope to see you guys there. Thanks.